Question number 2, Andrew Bailey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Finance and reads, what Productivity Commission reports has he received on New Zealand's urban planning system?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, last week the Productivity Commission released its draft report, Better Urban Planning, in response to Government's request for a first principles analysis of land use allocation because the land use is critical to the health and success of the New Zealand economy. The Commission finds that planning can contribute positively, but however planning legislation lacks clarity and focus. There's been planning overreach in urban areas, and the planning system is not responsive to changes in cities. Infrastructure funding tools do not recover costs or account for the risk placed on councils. The Productivity Commission also suggested that central government and local government should make more effort to understand the issues each other is dealing with.
Supplementary question, David Seymour.
Is the Minister concerned, or does he share the concerns of the report? For example, the level of complexity in land use planning laws is increasing. For example, the RMA was 382 pages when introduced in 1991, 790 pages in the 2011 revision, and 827 pages in a 2013 revision. And does the government have any plans to introduce RMA reforms that might reduce the length of the Act?
Before I call the Minister, can I just remind the member he raised a point of order last week about questions being in line with standing orders, particularly Standing Order 380. I'd be grateful if he could assist me as well. The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, we believe that the RMA amendment that's been proposed in this House will achieve some of those things, but I do agree with his general point that the complexity of planning has increased. The Auckland Unitary Plan, where the general thrust of it is correct, I think is around 7,000 pages. And it's possible that our councils are getting a bit too involved at very low levels of detail, not just in how our cities develop, but in how our own houses and households operate.
Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Andrew Bailey.
What does the Commission say are some of the consequences of excessive planning?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the Commission takes a fairly even-handed view about the function of planning itself, saying that it's important to achieve some aspects of the development of our cities. However, it does say that housing is unaffordable where land is unaffordable. The report highlights an 8-fold increase in the price of land in Auckland between 1996 and 2014. In 1996, a hectare of land in Auckland was valued at around $1 million. Today, it is valued at around $8 million. Research has previously associated that increase with Auckland's urban limits.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Andrew Bailey.
What steps is the government already taking as part of its comprehensive housing plan that were recommended by the Productivity Commission in its most recent report?
The
Mr.
Honourable
Speaker,
Bill English.
A lot of steps, because actually the very first report of the Productivity Commission back in 2012 was on the regulation of land use, and the government took some advice from that. The Commission says that notification and appeals should be limited to those more directly affected by development. That's part of the current RMA amendments. It says that planning should prioritise responding to growth and providing land use flexibility. That is the goal of the current RMA reforms and the National Policy Statement. The Commission says the government should be able to override local plans in limited circumstances where there are wider effects on the rest of the country. That is also part of the current amendments.
Supplementary question, David Seymour.
Which of those steps does the Minister think will be first to have an effect?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, they'll all have an effect at the same time when the RMA bill is passed. In the meantime, though, the prospects for improvement are pretty positive, because the Auckland Council has passed the Auckland Unitary Plan, which now enables twice as much housing supply as the original plans did, and that's good news, particularly for low and middle income households who want to, in the long run, own houses in Auckland.
Supplementary question, David Seymour.
Did the minister intend to infer that none of the steps in the government's comprehensive housing plan have had an effect yet and will not have an effect until RMA reform is passed?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, no, because a whole lot of other steps are in place, ranging from demand-side measures implemented under the macro-prudential policy, through to the special housing areas, through to the cranking up of the government's production of new houses on its own estate, particularly in Auckland.
Supplementary, Mr.
Supplementary
Speaker.
question, Andrew Bailey.
What steps is the government taking to get more social and emergency housing where it is needed most as part of the government's comprehensive housing plan?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, it is a bit of a challenge because 50 years of poor social housing policy has meant that about a third of Housing New Zealand's portfolio is in the wrong place or is the wrong type. So the government is making significant change to the social housing system at the same time as prices have been rising fast, and that does make the changes challenging. Sales to social housing tenants and where appropriate to first home buyers have generated revenue that is being reinvested. Housing New Zealand is planning to build around 2,000 houses over the next 2 years, on top of the 7,500 houses that are expected to be delivered by the Tamaki Redevelopment Company and community providers around the country.
Question number 3.